Thank you all very much for coming out. I have just returned from Belize. I traveled to Belize on Tuesday afternoon, and today is Thursday. I went to Belize for a one-day meeting. We traveled up on Tuesday at the assistance of the Mexican government, who provided transport for the heads of CARICOM from the Southern Caribbean, myself, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister of Grenada, and the President of Guyana. We left here and went to Belize, where we took part in the Caricom-Mexico Summit meeting, which was attended by the leadership of Mexico, led by President Peña Nieto and Foreign Minister Gosa. We had to take part in this meeting since there's a responsibility that lies with us, especially here in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have undertaken from this very platform, in speaking to you, we indicated that Trinidad and Tobago would resume its role of leadership in CARICOM, and also to establish links that could benefit our country and the region. This is one such links. We, in the mid-70s, had an arrangement with Mexico for greater cooperation and collaboration, which had pretty much languished for many years. There have been a couple of these meetings before, and I think this was the fourth one. And it was particularly useful that we get this going, because Mexico has indicated an interest of paying greater attention and greater involvement in the Caribbean CARICOM, and in working more closely with CARICOM for the mutual benefit. This meeting allowed us to discuss all the ways that Mexico can help by involving itself further in the Caribbean affairs. Mexico, as you might have known or may not have known, has been providing very quietly considerable assistance to our CARICOM neighbors. Mexico currently is rebuilding the Parliament of Grenada, which was destroyed in a hurricane not too long ago. Mexico has rebuilt a number of bridges in St. Vincent, where hurricane weather destroyed contact. And at this meeting, following our discussions, Mexico has agreed to provide $5 million to Antigua, Barbuda, and to Dominica as immediate assistance towards revitalizing those economies. Trinidad and Tobago has a great interest in these matters. While we are unable to provide financial support to our CARICOM neighbors as we might have done in the past, we are providing all the support that we can in terms of manpower and equipment that would be available at our expense to them, as we've done in Dominica and then the other islands. And we are providing diplomatic support. And this is one such instance where Trinidad and Tobago's presence at the meeting was very valuable in providing that diplomatic support to our neighbors, and also pursuing our own interests. As we here in Trinidad and Tobago talk about diversification, which is pretty much a cliche in Trinidad and Tobago now, the question always arises as to what do we diversify into. We are still very aggressive and buoyant in our hydrocarbon sector, and the challenges that we face is to expand into other export market arrangements, particularly for our manufactured goods. We can only expand our manufactured goods production if we have markets for them, and Mexico is a market of 100 million people, and we believe that as we look for markets and as we try to expand out, we can look at the Mexican market and put the relevant arrangements in place so that some of our manufactured goods and some of our services, whatever they might be opportunities for us to expand our economic and technical growth as a people. In our discussions with the Mexican leadership, Mexico is quite open to very urgently discussing with Trinidad and Tobago the establishment of a partial scope agreement, which means that we'll agree on what products from Trinidad and Tobago can have access to the Mexican market under preferential arrangements. And these partial scope agreements are usually worked out in such a way that the bigger economy doesn't swamp the smaller economy. It allows the smaller economy to enter and produce goods for the larger economy in a protected kind of way to allow that growth. So in Trinidad and Tobago, where our manufacturers manufacture for a 1.3 million home market and a 7 or 8 million plus Haiti in the Caribbean, if we get manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago to have any access to the Mexican market, even 1% of the Mexican market is huge for us. We have this arrangement in place with Costa Rica, Panama. We're working on one with Chile. As you know, I went to Chile recently on a state visit, and one of the outcomes of that is that we are working towards a partial scope agreement there, which will allow us to enter the Chilean market with whatever we can produce, and also selectively obtain from Chile things that are beneficial to us without the Chilean market swamping our market. The best thing about this is that the President of Mexico is now aware of these interests of Trinidad and Tobago and have instructed the Foreign Minister of Mexico to move immediately. And in the next week or two, our Foreign Minister, our Trade Minister would meet with the Mexicans to pursue this, and we're hoping that we could work out these agreements in short order. It involves examining all the products that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, see what can go into the Mexican market. And if we do get a partial scope agreement, then it means that we can encourage our private sector people to expand their production in the various arrangements that we have for production expansion, and to find partners and counterparts in the Mexican economy and seek to establish greater production here, which would be all for the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. We have also agreed that the arrangement between Mexico and CARICOM, we've issued a declaration, which is a 4-page declaration of a number of items which we agree we would distill down to about 10 items, where, to use the words of the President of Mexico, we are going to create a roadmap for development, largely through specific projects, which will be endeavors between the government of Mexico and CARICOM, involving all the CARICOM nations. So that is to be given high priority, and you'll hear more about that in the very near future. We also agreed that to accept Mexico's offer to work very assiduously with CARICOM countries in protection of our banking system, which is facing the de-risking and counterpart banking arrangements, where we do have some problems, where international banks are ceasing to do business with some of our territories and some of our banking entities. And we have had the assistance from Chile, and now we have Mexico joining in with that. We have discussed the possibility of another meeting in the very near future. The Secretariat of CARICOM will work on that to bring together the leadership of Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Canada along for a meeting here in CARICOM, so that we could consolidate the diplomatic efforts of these countries working with us. The main driver of this meeting was Mexico's acknowledgement that it needs to play a bigger role, identifying itself as a Caribbean nation, and play a bigger role in assisting CARICOM countries to become less vulnerable to natural disasters and to work towards more sustainable economies in the region. Now, this is a major development, because Mexico is the third largest economy in the Americas, in North America, and for the Mexicans to agree to play this role of lending this hand to the very brittle economies of CARICOM is a major development. You would have seen, if we start in the south, in Grenada, all the way up, virtually every CARICOM territory has had significant destruction of its economy in the last few years, directly as a result of natural events. And if you go back further, you would see where there were instances of whether it's the volcano, whether it's earthquakes, and frequently hurricanes, floods and landslides and so on. So this offer of help from a country which is in itself exposed to the same hazards, because interestingly enough, as Mexico has come to us and is making these offers to the Caribbean region, Mexico has also had destruction from one of those hurricanes. The Yucatan area was devastated as well. Mexico just had a huge earthquake where they've lost a number of people in Mexico City. Mexico City is very vulnerable to earthquakes, and of course Mexico has two huge volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Colima, in the middle of two of its largest cities, and Colima erupts every so often, resulting in significant threats and disturbance. But the Mexicans did not turn a blind eye to the need, similar needs in the region, and for that we are very grateful, and we intend to work very closely with them. Mexico also has a lot of experience in treating with civil defense issues, much of which has been in great conversation here in Trinidad and Tobago, but they're very experienced, and they've offered to provide us with any assistance that we require with respect to training and organizational development, and we will take advantage of that. Trinidad and Tobago most certainly will take advantage of those offers. We've also agreed to use the experience of Mexico in treating with criminal conduct of gangs and drug and arms and ammunition movement and management. And as part of our crime fighting initiative, we will accept from Mexico the offer for training and involvement and information sharing on matters of this nature. What all of this means is that the Mexicans are prepared to open up their experience and territory to the smaller Caribbean economies, including Trinidad and Tobago, and there can only be benefits from this. And we intend to, we as a CARICOM intend to manage this and ensure that we get the benefit of it. Another interesting thing that came up is that there's this green fund that came out of COP21, which is to facilitate alternative energy developments and environmental developmental works across the world. Well, a Mexican is managing that fund, and Mexico has promised to ensure that its presence there would be to the benefit not only of Mexico, but of the Caribbean as well, because Mexico views Mexico and the Caribbean as having a common interest. So that was what we spent all day yesterday discussing these various things, and some of the other CARICOM territories had other more specific matters specific to their territories, but for us in Trinidad and Tobago, the matters of security, training, cooperation, natural disaster, and trade, those were our specifics, and we've got very good responses, and we have the roadmap ahead of us. I want to say something to those of you who work in the media, and we all have different responsibilities. While I hold this job as Prime Minister, the job of the Prime Minister is different to that of the doctor or the nurse or the sanitary engineer. And as Prime Minister, I would not flinch from discharging my responsibility because somebody has something to say about where I travel and when I travel, and somebody is counting how often I travel. I will travel as frequently as is required for the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to travel to discharge the duties upon which I have embarked and that are required to be discharged by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. As soon as this visit was mentioned that I was going to Mexico, I saw a lot of people being exercised by the fact that I was traveling again. And of course, some idiot had it to say that I was traveling for my birthday. Yes, it was my birthday, but I don't know that there was any fun traveling from here to Belize on a 5-hour trip, going to a one-day meeting and getting back here, leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning, getting back here today. This was all work, and this is the kind of work that I will do as my job requires. And I can put you on notice that there'll be other instances where the interest of Trinidad and Tobago requires my presence, and on every such instance, unless there are good reasons for me not participating, I will be there representing Trinidad and Tobago. And incidentally, if there are people who want to count how often I go to Tobago, that I will ignore totally, because I'd like to remind them that this country is Trinidad and Tobago, and at the personal level, I maintain a home in Tobago, and I'll try to go there as often as I can. And of course, you know, we are currently engaged with 2 foreign nations that are working very closely with us, and if my presence to those nations are required, I will do that. But I'm a little concerned, though, that this matter came up in the Parliament, and it was said that I traveled 17 times. I have traveled far less than previous prime ministers, deliberately so. And every instance that I've traveled, most of it being to CARICOM meetings, because the CARICOM meets twice a year. There's the annual meeting of CARICOM heads, and there's the intersessional meeting. So we meet every 6 months as CARICOM heads. And those meetings, we treat with matters that are very germane to our current existence, our trade, our security, and so on and so on. So I've traveled to those meetings, and they're held in different CARICOM countries all the time. And I don't know that that should exercise and upset the population. But notice that the very people who are making an issue of me going to this meeting in Mexico, 2 weeks before, another one of them was shouting loudly in the Parliament that I had not gone to Paris, and I should have gone to Paris to the COP meeting. And had I gone to Paris, it would have been so important for the Prime Minister to be there. We sent our ambassador from Brussels to Paris because we could have discharged our responsibility there through an ambassador. And we choose our UN ambassador and so on. Then, of course, you heard another one, particularly the MP for Naparima. He spent 45 minutes or thereabouts, a similar time in the Parliament, excoriating me for not going to the UN General Assembly. Now, I think this is the 3rd time they've had a General Assembly that I've not gone. So I have chosen where my presence could benefit Trinidad and Tobago, and where we have other arrangements, like at the General Assembly, our foreign minister represented us there on those occasions. And if that is what is best, that's the decision that this government makes, and I'll make those decisions. But what I was bothered about was that when the numbers came up, 2 ministers of this government, one was the Minister of Planning and Development, spelled out the specific instances in which I traveled as Prime Minister. And the other one, the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, Minister Young, spelled out where my private visits had nothing to do with state business and were funded out of my own pocket. That was put on the Parliament floor in response to mischief-making statements from the opposition. And I was quite taken aback that I picked up the Express, and on the front page of the Express, there was a record of my making my 18th trip, giving support to opposition mischief. I don't think that it is not for me to tell the media how to do your business, but it is for me to object to the media giving support to misrepresentation when we in the Parliament rectify that misrepresentation. So those who are counting could keep on counting. I will discharge my duty as Prime Minister and be present where the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago is required to be. When I am not the Prime Minister, I will not be going to any of these meetings at all. That much you can know. So we've had a very good meeting, and we are looking forward to this expansion, as I mentioned, in bringing other countries that are very friendly to CARICOM to focus our diplomatic strength as a America's unit. And we expect that sometime in the not too distant future such a development will come to pass, and we will continue to build our relationships and hopefully benefit from them in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So if there are any questions that you may have relating to this or any other matter, I would be pleased to address those questions at this time.
In certain areas. Before you left, you did have a lot to say about the operations of the ODPM during recent flooding. The head of the ODPM has resigned. What is the next stage for that organization?
The next stage is that we'll advertise the positions of head of ODPM and director and deputy director. An advertisement will come out in the very near future, and we will screen and put the best people for the job. And we will review the operations, and we will more than likely restructure it and get a better understanding and prepare ourselves to respond more effectively. We expect that we'll do that in the coming months. In fact, very soon you will see the advertisements coming out. We have taken steps to ensure that that agency discharges responsibility in the best possible way.
Did the head of the OPM just voluntarily hand over his resignation, or was he encouraged to do so?
I wouldn't address that. That's from the Minister of National Security. That office is not in my ministry. That department reports to the Minister of National Security, and I would leave him to respond to those details.
Just as a follow-up, there's also the role of local government, the municipal corporations in disaster response and so on. What about the issue of funding resources for those corporations?
Well, as part of the review and local government reform, which we are now implementing, one of the things that we look to do as part of the review and operations is to give local government a clearer role and a more direct role as first responders. You see, the ODPM is the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. So we want to make sure that the preparedness aspect of it is done, and the management of it, when something happens, is also done. But the local government bodies, we have 14 of them in Trinidad and 1 in Tobago. Those 15 units are the first responders, and their role must be clear and being positioned to respond to any of the natural disasters that could occur, whether it's a landslide, a falling tree, flooding, and so on, that those first responders, everybody knows their role, and not only know it, but is in a position to, and is prepared to discharge it. It is not good for the country that every time some rain falls, every time a river overflows the bank, the country is exercised for days with finger pointing. Of course, there are those who jump in their boats and try to score political points, and that will leave to them. But in terms of the nation, having a proper response, that we know something has happened, we know we are responding to it, and those who are affected can anticipate care and attention and a relief from whatever has happened. And that also involves, as part of the preparation, is that those who are in harm's way, who can be assisted in getting out of harm's way, those kinds of things are also part of the disaster preparedness and management. But we will do a comprehensive overhaul.
The opposition is saying that you are passing the blame onto the ODPM, that you should not absolve yourself of any responsibility in this regard.
I am standing behind this platform as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And if that means that I am doing that, then obviously somebody doesn't understand the role of the Prime Minister. The job that I have, I understand that role. I am the head of the government, and ultimately I am responsible for the government's operations. The government has a series of ministers, and ministers have technocrats and the whole public service, and we all have different roles to play. So I am not going to take any advice from the opposition. I have some advice for them. I'll get them on Friday night.
So one of the questions from me, sir, the Express is reporting a senior police officer is conducting an investigation into misconduct in public office involving claims made by Dr. Munilal and text messages and so on. The issue involves the Attorney General. At one point in opposition, you said if there was an issue with Mr. Warner, he should step aside. Do you think this should apply to the Attorney General?
I have seen nothing other than opposition obfuscation. I have seen nothing other than opposition obfuscation, and therefore I have nothing to respond to. Let me just tell you all something. And again, I don't want to tell the media how to do its job. I am going to do my job. I know you're going to do yours. But just remember, remember Anika Gomes? Remember Anika Gomes of the Express that got up one morning and accused me personally as opposition leader of being inappropriate with her? You remember that story? That was UNC organized to discredit me as opposition leader. You saw that. Remember Vanilla Allen Toppin? That was organized by the opposition UNC to discredit me as opposition leader. That didn't only stay with me, it went as far as my father. Right? So now, right, that a third one organized by the same people targeting someone who they are mortally afraid of and who they want to damage politically, I will not be exercised by that. Okay? I have lived it, I know the model, and I think by now the country should know whose model that is.
Prime Minister, I just wanted to continue on from a little bit with the discussions that you had with the Mexican president regarding training and so on. Does any of that training per se going to be directed towards the whole effort of reorganizing the ODPDM? Is the Mexican government going to be giving us any assistance on any level with that restructuring? What
Mexicans have done is to hold out to us an open door to receive whatever we ask for in these areas. And the answer is yes, because President Peña Nieto indicated that this is an area that Mexico can contribute to our well-being. So, and in the other area, in the crime-fighting area, where Mexico is very experienced in operating the state versus criminals, we have a lot to learn from the Mexicans if we collaborate with them, and we intend so to do. So in the coming weeks and months and years, we expect that the National Security Ministry will walk through the door that the Mexicans have opened for us.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Happy belated birthday, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Vishala Ganesh from Radio and TV Geography. I have a very simple question. Any more plans to visit any more depressed communities following heavy rains and floods?
I don't know that I would immediately, because I have to get a feedback from the ministers. But what I do know is that this afternoon there's a press conference at 4:30 in Parliament. There are 5 ministers who have been involved in this matter, who have certain kinds of responsibilities. You have the Minister of National Security, the Minister of Agriculture and Lands, the Minister of Social Development, the Minister of Works and Transport, and the Minister of Local Government. These 5 ministers will speak to this issue at 4:30, and if there's anything that I can do further, personally from my office, then I will do it. But I'm relying on the government's structure, and each minister has a role to play. I know that there are many people who believe that as soon as anything happens, it should fall into the lap of the Prime Minister. I don't think so. The way I manage this government is that I'm required to delegate, and I delegate and hold ministers responsible for their areas. It is not for me to run out and play the panacea to everything and the minister of everything. I don't operate like that. The ministers will tell you that I hold them responsible for their areas. And if there is anything that I could do further, as a matter of fact, before I left, I asked the acting Prime Minister to ensure that Cabinet today approved some funding, and I understand that the Cabinet approved $35 million for immediate assistance to persons who have been affected in the various areas. How that is handled, the Ministry of Social Development and other agencies will go into the areas now that the water is draining off, will assess what happened, see who is qualified for assistance, and make that assistance available to those persons. So that has been done today, and this is the work now with the Ministry of Social Development and the local government bodies. But you know, there are some people who will not be pleased with whatever we do, but we can't be distracted by that. We just have to do what the government has to do. If we spend our time trying to be steered away from the governance issues and the responsibilities, we could find ourselves backing after every smoking bus that passes. We're not going to do that. We will go in and do what has to be done, properly discharging the responsibility of the government to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to all the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mr. Prime Minister, good afternoon. Urvashi from CNC3. Now, I appreciate the fact that you've not been in the country for the past few days. But as we speak, there are still citizens bailing out water from their houses. Their farms still covered with water. So I'm just asking you if you feel confident or if you're happy with the state of cleanup and
I couldn't answer that. I left here on Tuesday. I was away on Wednesday. I came back on Thursday. So I don't know that I can answer that because I don't know how far the responses have gone. I don't know how. I just flew over the Caricom River. I've seen that it has drained off considerably. From the air I could see the water has gone down considerably. I was in the Mayaro Mafiking area, which was the last area to be flooded. I saw what was going on, and even as I left here on Tuesday, the water was receding in that area. So I would expect that if there were no additional rains, by now many of the areas would have drained off. And when you have floods, while the water is either rising or is in place, there isn't much that you can do in cleanup. You have to wait until the water has drained off. And even as I was in Mafiking, those who had seen the water drained off had already begun cleaning out, and disinfectants and things were being distributed, and local government and local health were standing by to come in. So once the water is still in place, most people don't like to abandon their homes even when they're flooded. So what you have to do is to get them some help where they are in the flood waters. Some people who could not remain in place, there were a few instances where persons were taken to shelters. We wanted to make sure that when they get to those shelters that they had some comfort, some place to sleep that was warm and dry, and some food provided by either the public or the private sector. What I must do though is to commend the private sector initiatives in many areas where business and individuals have come forward, as we expect them to do in the sense of volunteerism, come forward and render assistance to those who needed assistance. And that we saw a lot of that, and all I can ask for is more of it in the event that we experience these things again. It's not a question of substituting government. It's a question of there's a role for government, and if the private sector and individuals can play a role, especially in these instances, that is also very valuable and should be commended, and I so do.
Now, I understand all that, Mr. Prime Minister, but of course I have to let you know, as a member of the media, we have visited communities and there are children who don't know where their parents who don't know where to get the next meal from. They just don't know where to start, and there's this feeling like government should help. Is it, as you say, every time it rains that people stand to lose their houses? You know, we need to shift the conversation, I believe, more to mitigation. We're talking about floodgates that have just collapsed, that haven't been repaired. We're talking about rivers which have not been dredged for years.
Listen, I just said that we are going to make sure that our first responders and our local government entities are in a position to provide that assistance to those who are actually in the situation. I would be surprised if there are people who have not yet been contacted or who have not been reached by persons other than in their immediate family within their households. Because I have seen, and I do know, that there are a lot of efforts that have gone out there through local government and other agencies. Now there's additional assistance to come through the Ministry of Social Development, and that comes over time. When you mention rivers that are not dredged, the flood we just had is not about dredging rivers. We have natural water courses that have a certain capacity. And whether you dredge them or not, once that capacity has been reached and the rivers begin to overtop, they flow into what is called the floodplains. Unfortunately for us in Trinidad and Tobago, there are many communities that occupy those floodplains. We also have rivers at very low grade entering the sea, and they are subject to tidal considerations. If you had gone out with me on the East Coast, you would have seen, as we were going south, the tide was low. The Ministry of Works is on the job, opening out the beach openings so that the water from the Nariva swamp and Nariva River could drain out. By the time we were coming back up, the sea was higher than the river because the tide was high. The river couldn't drain out. The water has to go somewhere. So it's spread out straight across the road, and this will have to, over time, drain out. In some instances, we actually are pumping water out of areas. On the creek, we had to pump water out of because the Araput River had overtopped, came into the swamp, and had blocked the road. So once we got that under control, to bring the road back into use, we had to actually pump that water out using pumps of the Ministry of Works, and we hired pumps from the private sector. These are things you do, and notwithstanding all the talk from people who would like to present the worst possible picture, this is what is required to be done under these circumstances. I empathize with those persons who have been affected. I've even heard people say, well, we should move all the people out who are in areas exposed. That is not feasible. It's not feasible. And of course, it is said that it is happening because this government is the most incompetent government in the world. Well, they have plenty of them in the world, because you look around the world on a daily basis, you see situations of heavy weather, excessive rainfalls, which happen every so often, not every day, not every season. Every so often you get excessive rainfall and the water overcomes the channels. Right? And in the Otway River, in the Orapooch River, and to a lesser extent the Caroni River, which breaches banks. I think there were six points where the Caroni River levee broke. Now, when that happens, only one thing that will happen. The water will spread out into the surrounding lowlands. And those areas are occupied by communities in the south in particular, and the deep south. When that happens, we do unfortunately have flooding arrangements. You see, the dredging issues can deal with low volumes, where if you ensure that there's no obstruction. Sometimes the river is blocked during the storm, like happened in Tunapuna. During Brett and during this period of rainfall, twice we had situations where during the storm, the channel that was cleared in the dry season, during the storm, a huge bamboo stool came down as a landslide that now blocks the river during the storm. It resulted in flooding. So we had to go after the flooding, or even during the flooding, and try and remove that from the channel. It happened again in the same area, where if you have steep banks, even though the river is clean, during the storm, the waterlogged sides can result in landslides coming down into the channel, and the channel is blocked. So these are natural things that you have to respond to. And if there are some people who want to make their life over that, some people, I must say, were genuinely happy that there was flooding in South Trinidad. Genuinely happy. They put on their party clothes and they come out in the little boats and they're happy like puppy because South flood. And they could accuse everybody of all kinds of things, including racism. Right? That's Trinidad and Tobago. I've seen members of parliament accusing the government of racism because some part of the constituency flood. Diego Martin experienced this a few years ago. We didn't get up and accuse anybody of racism. They paid for it twice. Right? 2 or 3 times they paid to clean up Diego Martin. And in Diego Martin, in Glencoe, what actually happened there? There was a landslide that came down during the storm, blocked the drainage, the watercourse became, the road became the watercourse, and damaged very many areas. We lost our road in Glencoe. We took it in stride. This was the natural development. The government came in, rebuilt the road, and we move on. So that is what I would expect. But there are some people who actually enjoy a good flood.
Yes, I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but just to let you know that we have received complaints that some persons have not received assistance committed to them from since the passage of Tropical Storm Brett.
Okay, let me answer before you go any further. It is not everybody that expects assistance will qualify for assistance. This is Trinidad and Tobago. What we try to do is to ensure that those persons to whom the assistance is designed and those who qualify for it, that they get it. And some people expect more assistance than they are entitled to. That is not, again, a surprise to anyone. Right? But if there are people with such genuine complaints, then I am sure that the public officers who are involved and the ministry involved, such complaints can be looked at to ensure that no person is disadvantaged through inadvertence or any other cause.
Dr. Rowley, I found it was interesting that you would say that we would get assistance from Mexico. They would offer training and information sharing as it relates to the fight against crime, because this is a country infamous for cartel crimes.
Mexico, as I said, the government, the state of Mexico, the government of Mexico has very good record in crime fighting and dealing with gangs and drug trafficking and things like that. And those experiences they can share with us. Right? countries that have that as a, because of what they have been facing over the years, over the decades, they have built up certain kinds of experience and certain kinds of skills which allow us to be able to learn from them.
Mr. Prime Minister, just one more question. While you were not here, there has been a claim which has come into the public domain that the Chief Election Officer at the EBC is relative to Public Administration Minister Maxi Coffey. To some extent, we've been able to confirm that the Narcissus family is in fact related to the Coffeys. But of course, questions have been raised as to the independence of the EBC given that relation. Are you at any position to comment on this or to shed some light into this?
Well, let me say something about that, right? I don't know what you're talking about because that information is not known to me who the people family is. But I simply want to caution Trinidad and Tobago not to go down the road of other countries that started on these slippery slopes and can't come back up. One of the few of our institutions that find favor with the public and who have kept their duty out of bacchanal as far as they're able to, even though they have been drawn into it, is the Election and Boundaries Commission. I don't know who the person is related to, but that direction of talking about the independence of the EBC because somebody is somebody's distant pumpkin vine cousin, I will say no more on that because I know no more about it. I want to say one thing though. I suspect where it's coming from is the same source that took the EBC to court, saying that the EBC, in trying to facilitate voting in this country, had done something improper, and that 5 of the PNM seats were to be contested, and those who opposed us in the election were told that those 5 seats were going to be overturned in the court and that they should keep their jerseys because we're going to by-elections. That was the advice of the opposition leader who put on a gun and go to the court and challenge us on that. I can tell you now, I'm glad you raised it. The PNM has won those matters. The court last week has granted cost to the PNM members in the tune, I expect, of millions of dollars, and we expect to collect every cent of it. And I notice that that major development has not made the news in Trinidad and Tobago. When they were parading that we were an illegitimate government because we got 5 seats through EBC underhandness and the court going to overturn it and la 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 la. And when the court agreed to hear the matter, it was a major victory for senior counsels on the other side. General mischief makers, when the court ruled last week that they owe cost to the San Fernando Court of Appeal, San Fernando East, San Fernando West, St. Joseph, Tunapuna, Tocos and the Grande, those, so where we are now, whoever is raising this matter, as a matter of fact, I signed off on that appointment, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember who the person was. Yeah, that recommendation came to us. We had no interest in the matter, as we have not been in terms of we have no horse in the race. We rely on the institutions. And this development of questioning somebody who got a job like that because somebody is saying that they're related to somebody down the road, I advise this country to stay away from that. That is how some countries lost their way, because that is the forerunner to question election results and election confusion to generate, because some people believe that since they can't get into office by fair means, they certainly can try to get there by foul. I say no more on that. I have no knowledge of this person's pedigree or ancestry. What I do know is that the Service Commission would have looked around and would have chosen the best candidate for the job, and the government had no involvement other than to support the Commission's.
Prime Minister, my colleague Mark Basan, there was a story last night, both on TV6 News and the Express, concerning a private shipping company, a report concerning whether that company should be held liable for a fire on the T&T Spirit. That issue and that issue also of the Sea Bridge. Is that something you have?
I have no information I can assist you with on that, and I'm sure that the relevant minister and the relevant board can respond to all of that. I am not in a position to add anything or to query anything there.
Any further update in terms of the state of the sea bridge?
Except that I'm waiting to hear the port do its evaluation and choose a vessel that we can get on with.
So one other question, members of the gaming sector continue to call on the government to revisit its position regarding increasing the taxation on the gaming sector. In fact, they're saying that they would prefer legislation before increased taxation. They say they're paying taxes.
Well, you see, we all have our preferences, but at the end of the day, the government has a preference to legislate in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. My understanding is that the legislation that we are proceeding with has nothing to do with taxation. It is an establishment of a gaming commission to oversee the operations of gaming, other than taxation. Taxation is a matter for the Minister of Finance. My understanding is that the Minister of Finance is expecting a meeting. He has asked for a meeting with the owners of casinos to discuss the business. What the owners have done is to put the workers out there. No taxation is being levied on any of those workers. The owners of casinos have put the workers out there, and that must be some kind of abuse for workers to be put out to fight against taxation that is levied at owner benefits. So I expect that the minister will meet with the owners very soon, and the owners and the Minister of Finance, if there's any discussion about levels of taxation or things like that, I will rely on the advice of the Minister of Finance. But in the meantime, the decision of levels of taxation and location of taxation would be for the Minister of Finance, guided by the Cabinet. Yes, over here, please. Could you...
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Janine Brown, CNMG. As we move to boost our trade relations with Mexico, I want to ask, yesterday during the sitting of the Senate, Independent Senator David Small expressed some concern about the manufacturing sector as it relates to being able to produce quality goods at international standard. Is this to any level something that you as Prime Minister share, and what measures, if any, are being employed to improve the efficiency of the goods that we produce?
Well, all manufacturers have a requirement to produce quality goods. And I do know that there are Trinidad and Tobago manufacturers that are producing goods that measure up to the highest international standards. And we do have entrepreneurs in this country who have gone abroad and have got involved in manufacturing and providing products in far reaches of the world. We have our banking sector in some parts outside of Trinidad and Tobago doing very well. We have our technical people who are doing also very well. So while there may be instances where you have products that may not meet standards, such products wouldn't get very far, but I would like to look at it the other way around, that we do have products that are of the highest quality produced in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you all very much, and thank you for coming.